Today we are looking at a case from the late 18th century, so sit back as we go to France. Marie-Anne Charlotte de Corday d'Armont, better known as Charlotte Corday, was born on the 27th of July 1768 on a farm in the small village of Les Champeaux in Normandy in northwest France. She was the fourth child of a provincial but noble family. Her father was Jacques-François de Corday d'Armont, and her mother's name was Charlotte Marie Gauthier d'Artois. The family had a famous lineage, as the brothers of Charlotte's great-great-grandmother were the famous playwrights Thomas and Pierre Corneille. Although her father was considered a distinguished gentleman, he was not wealthy, and when Charlotte was still a young girl, the family moved to the nearby city of Caen, where there were better opportunities for her father to work. Soon after, tragedy struck, when on the 8th of April 1782 her mother died. Her mother's death had a profound effect on her father. He was trying to support his family and control his grief, but finding it very difficult, he sent Charlotte and her sister Eleanor to study at the Abbé aux Dames boarding school. Whilst there, she started to read the works of Voltaire and Rousseau and began to understand the widespread discontent in the country with the French monarchy and the poor economic policies of King Louis XVI. She took a keen interest in the movement that wanted to instigate change to the French political system. She wanted a nationally elected government and for people to have the right to vote. In 1791, Charlotte went to live with her elder cousin in Caen, and the two became great companions. She continued to take a keen interest in the changes in France that had started in 1789, when a large Parisian crowd seized the Bastille. She began to support the Girondins, a moderate political faction who wanted to end the rule of the monarchy by dialogue and peaceful means. Charlotte would listen to their speeches and read their literature, which greatly conflicted with the more radical views of a group known as the Montagnards, who favoured a far more aggressive approach to the revolution. Charlotte very much disagreed with the Montagnards and thought that France needed to be saved from them. One of their leaders was a political theorist, physician and scientist named Jean-Paul Marat. He would broadcast his feelings to large Parisian crowds and publish his political opinions in his own newspaper called L'Ami du Peuple, where he was able to express his suspicion of those in power and carry his revolutionary message throughout France. Whilst both Marat and Charlotte desired the same thing, their means of how they wanted to achieve it were very different. On the 2nd of September 1792, a terrible event began in Paris, known as the September Massacres. It started partly due to the fear that foreign and royalist armies would attack the city and that the inmates of the city's prisons would be freed to join them. An angry mob formed and attacked 24 priests who were being transported to a prison named L'Abbé. None of them survived. The mob then entered the prison and attacked the prisoners. Most of the killings were preceded by a trial, but it was nothing more than playing to the crowds. The following day, Jean-Paul Marat called for the provisional revolutionaries to come to Paris and help the cause. Many people arrived in the capital, while others stayed in their communities and attacked people who they believed were supporters of the monarchy. In the 4 days of the terrible event, it is estimated that between 1,100 and 1,400 people died. The vast majority who were ordinary criminals in prison for minor offences, such as thieving, being in debt, or causing an affray whilst drunk. Most supported the revolutionary cause and were unfortunate enough to be behind bars at the wrong time. People who supported the Girondins predominantly blamed Jean-Paul Marat for the September massacres. Although he was a leading advocate calling for a revolution, there were other Montagnard members who were equally as vocal. Charlotte, however, considered him to be the instigator. He had his newspaper, in which he could express his radical views and encourage people to use violence in order to bring about change, something that Charlotte was greatly opposed to. Violence, however, continued, and on the 21st of January 1793, King Louis XVI was guillotined. His execution caused political unrest and enabled Marat to use his newspaper to try and spread anti-Girondin sentiment. The Girondins, however, still had some influence and demanded that Marat be tried before a revolutionary court. He went into hiding, but eventually was arrested and put in prison to await his trial. It started on the 24th of April, and he was charged with printing statements calling for violence and the suspension of the convention. Marat pleaded not guilty and skillfully defended his actions. When the trial ended, he was found not guilty on all charges. He left court triumphant, surrounded by cheering crowds who had gathered to support him. Following this, the Girondins started to lose their influence in the National Convention, and Charlotte feared that France was descending into civil war. On the 9th of September 1793, Charlotte left her cousin's house in Caen and travelled to Paris, which was 200 miles away. She arrived at night and found lodgings in an inn. She was very tired after her long journey, so went straight to sleep. The next morning she got dressed and went into the city centre. It was a pleasant morning and everything seemed calm. There was no disorder, just people going about their everyday business. Charlotte was an educated and eloquent young lady, and as she wandered through the streets, she admired the French Baroque architecture, which had so profoundly influenced Europe throughout the 18th century. She stopped outside a shop and peered through the window at the display. There were many kitchen items for sale, but the one that Charlotte wanted was a 6-inch kitchen knife. She purchased it and slowly made her way back to her lodgings. For the next few days, Charlotte wrote a personal manifesto entitled Address to the French People, Friends of Law and Peace. In this she explained the reasons for her actions. Every day she wrote more, only occasionally taking a break for a stroll. She had always thought that Paris was so beautiful in the summer. Charlotte's plan was to confront and kill Jean-Paul Marat in front of the whole National Convention. A very ambitious plan, and one which she soon learnt would not be possible when it came to her attention that he no longer attended the meetings as he suffered from a skin disorder and spent much of his time at home in the bathtub to try and relieve his discomfort. On the 13th of July, Charlotte went to Marat's house at Rue de Cordelier. She knocked on the door, and it was answered by a lady named Catherine Evard, who was a sister of his fiancé. Charlotte told her that she had to see Marat, as she had information of a planned Girondist uprising in Caen. Catherine Evard, however, would not permit her to enter and said she would have to come back another time. Charlotte returned to the house that evening, and this time she was invited in. She was escorted to the bathtub, where Marat lay soaking in hot water. Apparently, this was where he received most of his visitors. Charlotte looked at him. He looked older than his 50 years. She gave him the names of the Girondins, and he wrote them down. He was pleased with the information, and apparently told her that they would all face the guillotine. But as he put down the paper, Charlotte pulled out a knife that she had concealed in her dress and plunged it into his chest. It is said that he called out, "Aidez-moi, ma chère amie," "Help me, my dear friend," before slumping into his bathtub. On hearing his cries, people rushed to his room. A doctor was immediately summoned, and Charlotte was apprehended. But as the small gathering of people looked on, it became apparent that Jean-Paul Marat was dead. Charlotte was arrested and taken to be interrogated. News of the murder had already started to spread throughout Paris, and as her carriage made its way through the cobbled streets to the Abbaye prison, a large crowd gathered to follow it, some not believing that this pretty, eloquently dressed young lady could have committed such a terrible crime. Charlotte, however, was unmoved by all the commotion. She remained calm and dignified in the knowledge that she had achieved what she had set out to do. During her interrogation, neither the authorities or the revolutionary judicial officials thought that she had acted alone. Everyone believed that this had been planned by the Girondins, and Charlotte was part of a group of conspirators. Charlotte told them that she had acted alone, and there was no one else who knew of her plan. Her trial was a routine affair. She did not deny the killing of Jean-Paul Marat. The authorities did, however, want to establish that she had definitely acted alone. A farewell letter that she had written to her father had been intercepted and was read out in court. This suggested that she had meticulously planned the murder and that no one else was aware of what she was going to do. Charlotte stood up and addressed the court. She said, "Anything was justified for the security of the nation. I killed one man in order to save 1,000. I was a Republican long before the revolution, and I have never lacked the resolution of people who can put aside personal interests and have no courage to sacrifice themselves for their country." Her lawyers were powerless to defend her, as she seemed determined to sacrifice herself for the good of France. At the end of a trial, with a large and noisy crowd outside the courtroom, Charlotte Corday was found guilty of the murder of Jean-Paul Marat and sentenced to death. She was taken back to prison, where she had one last request. She asked if she could have her portrait painted, and this was granted. On the 17th of July 1793, Charlotte was transported to the Place de Grève. She was wearing the red overblouse, which signified that she was a traitor who had assassinated a representative of the people. A very big crowd had gathered to see her. She entered the guillotine in a calm and resolute manner, a woman who firmly believed that her crime was committed for the good of France. Following her beheading, a man named Legros lifted the head from the basket and slapped it on the cheek, an action that very much amused the crowd but offended the officials. Legros spent the next 3 months in prison. Charlotte's body was taken to be buried at the Madeleine cemetery. The consequences of her crime, however, did not have the effect on the French nation that she had hoped. Jean-Paul Marat became a martyr figure in France. Roads and squares were renamed after him, and his sculpture was put up in a prominent Paris location. The reign of terror continued, and people who were against the revolution were attacked. Violence was still an everyday occurrence in the streets of Paris. Women also did not want to be associated with Charlotte, as most thought that doing so would not help the developing French feminist movement, which had been gathering momentum in the country. Her death, however, marked the beginning of a moderate phase in the French Revolution, in which the French people revolted against the Reign of Terror's excesses. A year later, in August 1795, the National Convention, which now was made up mainly of people who supported the Girondin movement, who had survived the Reign of Terror, approved a new constitution. Although Charlotte's actions were not recognised in 1793 as heroic, time has been kinder to her, and now many people consider her a heroine who died for her cause. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I will see you in the next Brief Case